So today I'm doing my very tardy May month end wrap up. So stick around to see what I've been up to. Well, hey everybody, Roger here, and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. So today I'm doing part 2 of my May month-end wrap-up, and I'll put a link to the first wrap-up video down below. As always, I break up my wrap-up into 2 parts. Part 1, usually about the middle of the month, and part 2, the end of the month. Although I didn't do so well this month. I was on vacation for like a week and a half. Then I got back and then I got a horrible cold, so I couldn't talk for like a week. So now I'm really behind and I'm playing catch up. So the wrap-up, I read a total of 15 books during the month of May, so this video only covers the last 8 that I read. And as usual, I'll put a link to all of the books that I mentioned in the description, as well as the times where each book is discussed. And that way you can quickly jump to a specific book that you're interested in hearing more about. So, and actually, the majority of the books that I read this month were either audio books or ebooks, mostly ebooks, actually. I was playing catch up on my ARCs this month. So the first book that I read, or I should say I listened to, was entitled The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. So The Kiss Quotient follows Stella Lane, a 30-year-old successful econometrician who's had very little experience dating. The 3 sexual experiences she has had have been pretty much epic disasters, and it doesn't help that her mother is putting pressure on her to find someone and start a family. Now, it's not easy for Stella, however, given that she has Asperger's, a highly functioning form of autism, which makes it difficult for her to connect with people, as she finds intimacy kind of awkward and she really doesn't like to be touched. So Stella decides that she needs more experience to become better at sex and relationships. So she hires Michael Fan, a male escort of Vietnamese and Swedish descent, to help her. Now, Michael keeps himself pretty much barricaded off and never sees a client more than once. But he makes an exception for Stella after their first night together. Now, Michael is a fashion designer, he works in the family business, and his secret escorting gig is only to help him pay off his mother's medical expenses, and nobody knows what he does on the side. So what I liked about this book is that it never shames Michael for being a sex worker. In fact, it makes Michael look heroic, willing to do whatever it takes to help his family. Another thing I liked about Michael's character was how respectful he is of Stella's boundaries. So he realizes right away that Stella has a difficult time being touched, so he always waits until she is completely 100% ready before he moves on to the next step of his instruction. These respectful and patient sex scenes are really quite touching and nicely illustrate the kind of person that Michael is. So in Michael, the author gives us a delightful hero who's sensitive, empathetic, noble, and incredibly hot, who understands Stella and her needs. His gentle patience with her was indeed quite heartwarming. Now, likewise, Stella was an awesome heroine. She's intelligent, strong, awkward in social situations, but refuses to compromise her values to be something that she's not. So I really loved her character, and given that this is an Own Voices story, I appreciated the glimpse into Stella's autism. I like the Asperger's representation here and enjoyed learning more about it from Stella's perspective. You know, it's really a delight to have a strong and confident female character trying to find her place in a world where conformity is the norm. Now, one thing that surprised me about this book was that it contained explicit and graphic sex scenes, and many of them. Now, I really had no idea that this was a steamy novel until I got well into it. So though it is quite graphic, I felt that the love scenes were well done, and each one did help to move the plot forward. Now, given that I consumed this as an audiobook, I had to close my kitchen window several times so I didn't shock the neighbors. Have them wondering, what the hell kind of smut is he listening to? Now, I will say that this isn't a typical smutty romance novel, though there was certainly that aspect to it. But rather, this novel had a lot of depth and substance to it. And though the sex was there, it was secondary to the amazing plot. Still, if you don't like sex in your novels, then you'll probably want to shy away from this one. But I did think that this book was so unique and refreshing in that it placed a heroine with Asperger's as a lead in a romantic comedy. Additionally, I love the slow burn romantic build-up in this story. So, in my opinion, everything that one likes to see in a good romance is here. It's funny, it's inspiring, heartfelt, intense, emotional, with just the right amount of steam, and a happily ever after. Now, honestly, contemporary romance is kind of a tricky genre for me. It's very difficult for me to find one that I truly love, but this one nailed it. Even though contemporary romance isn't my go-to genre, I'm already looking forward to reading the next book in this series, which is The Bright Test. So the next book that I read this month was entitled The Hungry Ghost by Helene Strom. So I am a sucker for a ghost story, so the title immediately caught my attention. But this was not your typical ghost story. Rather, it was kind of a possession story by an entity that was referred to the narrator as a ghost. So the entity here, or the hungry ghost, is actually based on Buddhist, Taoist, and other Eastern texts, which describes a demon-like creature that is afflicted with an insatiable hunger or thirst, usually as a result of bad deeds or evil intent that was carried out through their lifetime. So they're typically described as these human-like wraiths with long necks and extended stomachs. So this was actually my first exposure to this idea of a hungry ghost, and I felt that it made for a fascinating premise in a novel. So the story follows a young woman named Sam who is in a coma following a car accident. We then follow the point of view of a ghost who wanders aimlessly in this hellish purgatory-like world where it hungers and thirsts but can never satisfy its cravings. So the ghost somehow manages to sneak through to our realm and occupy Sam's unconscious body, and to everyone's surprise, Sam awakens. Though it doesn't take long for her loved ones to realize that there's something seriously wrong with her, apart from her incessant eating. She's definitely not the same person she was before the accident. And as the ghost grows more powerful, the safety of Sam's loved ones becomes threatened, and it's up to them to somehow stop this hungry ghost before destroying them as well. So what I especially enjoyed about this novel is experiencing the ghost's thoughts as it tried to get used to its new body and to make sense out of the strange world in which it finds itself. I thought being in the ghost's thoughts was absolutely riveting, especially once it took control of Sam's body and was driven forward by this insatiable and animalistic appetite. So initially the book had a paranormal thriller sort of vibe to it, but then during the second half it really changed direction and became more of a horror novel actually. I thought this was such a unique story with some interesting twists and turns, and I've never read anything quite like it previously. So the premise of The Hungry Ghost is an entirely new twist of the ghost story genre, and I felt that it worked really well in this story. Though I wish the author had delved a little deeper into the ghost's backstory and how it really came into existence. But this was a short novel. I think it was around 200 pages, so a bit more detail wouldn't have been unwelcome. Again, horror novels can be hit or miss with me, and though I would have liked a little more backstory, I did end up enjoying this. Oh, and in the spirit of disclosure, I did receive an advanced reader copy of this in exchange for an honest review. So the next book that I read in May was entitled We Are Lost and Found by Helene Dunbar. So this story is set in the early 80s in New York City and follows Michael, a young gay man, and his two best friends, Becky and James, as they come of age during the time when AIDS first emerged. So the story is told from Michael's point of view, and we watch as he becomes comfortable with his sexuality, though he's forced to hide it at home because his parents are really homophobic. In fact, his father had just thrown Connor, Michael's brother, out of the house after Connor came out to them. So I found the premise of two gay siblings actually quite intriguing in the story, and how they both dealt with an extremely homophobic father and a mother who was unwilling to stand up and challenge him. I really enjoyed the complicated relationship between the two brothers and how that relationship matured by the end of the story. So Michael here is struggling to be himself in a world where sex can kill you, and where he could find himself living on the streets if his parents were ever to find out that he's gay. So luckily his two best friends are there to help keep him sane. So I actually really love the side characters, Becky and James. Each was a quirky, distinctly drawn individual and really added to the richness of the story. So with them and the relationship with Michael, there was the idea here of how bonds of a family created by choice could often be stronger than those created by blood. And that certainly seemed the case here. So then, Michael meets a boy named Gabriel who makes it pretty clear that he's interested in Michael. And it doesn't take long before Michael's swept off of his feet by the enigmatic young man. So enthralled by those feelings of first love, Michael has to now decide just how far he's willing to go, both sexually and toward being himself. But the deeper his feelings become for Gabriel, the more his fears about contracting AIDS begins to pretty much overwhelm him. Now, my only real niggle with the story was that the author did not use quotation marks here on the dialogue. And this is the second time that I've encountered this in a novel. And again, I do not like it. I hate it, in fact. Lack of quotes, in my opinion, makes it, well, especially in this novel too, it makes it difficult to discern whether I'm reading dialogue or whether I'm reading inner monologue, and it tends to pull me right out of the story. So again, I maintain my position that grammar and punctuation are there to help the reader, and I feel that novels without quotation marks makes them a lot more challenging to read. Though it did help that this particular story is kind of told in a vignette format, which kind of had a feeling of journal entries to it, so the lack of quotes wasn't quite so jarring as it was in the first novel that I read without quotes. But quotation marks aside, I really ended up enjoying We Are Lost and Found. This is the kind of story that makes you laugh in some places and weep in others, as it's heartbreaking and somewhat raw, but it is ultimately hopeful. Now, I have to say that I feel that this is an important story, as really not everyone realizes how devastating the emergence of AIDS was and how utterly frightening the early 80s was for those of us who were coming of age during that time. But this is a story layered with complexities as it delves into sexuality, love, family discord, loyalty, friendship, fear, and AIDS. So all in all, it's a beautifully written, heartfelt story that is well worth the read, in my opinion. Oh, and I also want to mention that I did receive an advanced reader copy of this in exchange for an honest opinion. So the next book that I read was entitled Made for You by Anyta Sunday. So those of you who have watched my channel for a while are probably familiar with Anyta Sunday, as I've read quite a few of her books. So Made for You is a male/male romance that follows 24-year-old Ben, who's raising his 11-year-old brother Milo after the sudden death of their parents a year ago. Now Ben, he's kind of having a hard time of it, especially after a spirit-breaking parent-teacher night, and he's kind of feeling right now that he's failing to provide Milo that kind of care that he should have, especially given that Ben acts more like a brother to Milo than a parent, which of course he is. So he's clearly overwhelmed by the insane amount of responsibility that's fallen to him. But he resolves to do better, and the first order of business is to get his parents' home into shape so he can sell it, much against Milo's wishes. So Ben then hires shop teacher slash handyman Jack to fix up the house, and he allows Jack to reside there while Milo and Ben continue to live in the adjacent cottage. So right from the get-go, it's easy to see the chemistry between Jack and Ben, though Jack is determined to keep Ben at a distance for several reasons. But Ben doesn't make it easy for Jack as he flirts with the older man continuously, which eventually wears the poor fellow down. So typical Anyta Sunday style, the barriers between the two of them slowly start to break down as the two men grow closer in the coming days. So it's fun seeing the steady and calming effect of Jack's presence in both Ben and Milo's lives, and I love watching the bonds and trust form between the three of them as the novel progresses. All of the characters in the book were delightfully crafted and wonderfully complex. But what worked for me the most was the amazing romantic build-up between Jack and Ben. They had a caring and evolving friendship that wasn't rushed or forced, and that moved organically into something bigger, something more inevitable. It was sweet, heartwarming, and you really couldn't help but root for two guys to get together. Made for You is a lovely feel-good story about home, family, love, loyalty, honesty, and following your heart. And I really ended up enjoying this book. So the next book that I read was also an advanced reader copy, and it was titled No Ordinary Soldier, written by Liz Gilmore Williams. So this book is the result of an incredible amount of research by the author Liz Gilmore Williams as she tries to understand her enigmatic father years after his early death from leukemia at the age of 51. Oh, and I also want to mention that this is nonfiction. So the book mainly focuses on the correspondence between her father Herb and her mother Anne before and during the early stages of their marriage, during their father's enlistment in the army between 1940 and 1945. Now, Herb and Anne had known each other only briefly before he joined the service and ended up actually getting married during one of his furloughs. So Herb was stationed in Hawaii during the Pearl Harbor attack, and I found it riveting to read about the event as seen through his eyes. So from Herb's correspondence, we learned just how much the American troops were utterly blindsided by the Pearl Harbor attack. Also riveting were the day-to-day descriptions of Herb's life as a soldier during the war, especially when we witnessed the horrendous living conditions the soldiers endured on the Pacific Islands, including a variety of tropical diseases, filth, horrendous mosquitoes, loneliness, and boredom. So in this way, the reader gets an account of the personal history of a soldier as well as a national account of World War II from a soldier's perspective, all of which makes for quite fascinating reading. So the reason for the research and the subsequent book was the author's quest to better understand her father, who was quite a difficult man and was prone to rages during the author's childhood. Through the massive correspondence between her parents, as well as from interviewing family members, the author draws conclusions and believes she's uncovered some family secrets, or more aptly, her father's secret life. Now, truth be told, I wasn't all that convinced, as the conclusions drawn were based on relatively weak evidence, in my opinion. So the father's secret part of the book, at which the title and blurb both hinted, didn't really work that well for me. It's also worth mentioning that the author's theory about her father's hidden life wasn't discussed until right at the very end of the book. So if you're expecting a deep dive into Herb's secret life, you may be disappointed. Now, family dynamics aside, I did find this a compelling read about an army soldier serving in the Pacific during World War II. The detailed correspondence between the author's parents made for quite a gripping read, especially for people who enjoy reading wartime correspondence slash stories. I found this book to be a poignant and moving account of an American GI's life during the war, and really enjoyed the historical aspect of the book as well as the marvelous photographs that were included. Okay, so the next book that I read this month was entitled Superman Dawnbreaker, written by Matt de la Pena. So this is the fourth book in the DC Icon series, which each of the books being standalone novels. So this book is a reimagining of Superman, who is one of my favorite superheroes, so I was really looking forward to this. So Superman Dawnbreaker follows a young Clark Kent who's still living at home with his parents and is struggling to keep his powers a secret. So there are basically three main streams of intrigue in this story. Certain people are fighting to pass a law that would allow police to pull over anybody at any time to verify their immigration status. A large corporation is buying up land around town, and people, mostly Mexican men, from small villages surrounding cities are disappearing without a trace. Now, Clark also catches some strange men on the Kent farm trying to break into the barn, which Clark's father keeps locked at all times, leading to some interesting questions and subsequent revelations. So once people begin disappearing, Clark, along with his best friend, Lana Lang, take it upon themselves to investigate and get to the bottom of the town's mysteries. So in the process, they encounter deadly foes and meet people who are not at all what they seem. And when danger strikes, Clark then needs to decide whether to keep his superpowers a secret or risk exposure to save the town. So given that the story takes place on the Kent farm while Clark was still in high school, the book does have a Smallville vibe to it that reminded me a lot of the TV show. But regardless, the author did manage to give Clark Kent slash Superman a new spin in this modernized retelling for 2019. So the story here mainly focuses on immigration and racial issues, which the author blended into Clark's story. I actually thought that the topic of immigration slash illegal aliens, in light of Clark being an alien from another planet, was actually quite clever. Now, as an origin story, it was fun seeing Clark learn about his past and exactly what he is capable of. I enjoyed watching him as he came into his powers and ultimately accepting who he is. Now, the story definitely got better during the last 25% of the book. I actually thought the beginning was kind of boring, as not a whole lot happened during the first part. The story is also incredibly political, which many people might find preachy or at the very least polarizing. So that being said, with its weaving in the theme of racism and immigration into the Superman origin story, I don't know, the book felt a tad overambitious and maybe even a little bit forced to me. So I ended up feeling mostly underwhelmed by the end. I guess I was just hoping for a little bit more from a Superman origin story. The book never really explored the personality of Clark Kent and what he's all about. So I guess his character ended up feeling a little bit flat for me. Now, I didn't dislike the book. It was an okay read. I just didn't love it as much as I had hoped, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. So the next book that I read this month was entitled We Free Men by Terry Pratchett. So I'm a huge Terry Pratchett fan, and I love his Discworld series. However, I realized that I've never read any of the Tiffany Aching books in that series, which start around book 30 or 31, I do believe. So I decided to give We Free Men a go, which is the first book in the Tiffany Aching series. So We Free Men follows our 9-year-old protagonist, a young witch-to-be and granddaughter of the well-known witch Granny Aching. And the young lady has unknowingly taken on the role of protectress of Chalk County when she knocks a monster who crept out of the river over the head with a frying pan. So she then befriends the Knack-Mack Feegle, also known as the We Free Men, who are a clan of 6-inch tall, ginger-bearded, blue-skinned, rabble-rousing, thieving, sword-wielding, fierce little men, also known as pixies. So when Tiffany's candy-obsessed little brother is kidnapped, she, along with the Knack-Mack Feegle, have to take things in their own hands until proper witches can come to help. So they enter into fairyland where they have to battle all sorts of monsters until Tiffany has to face the evil queen alone. So this book was hilarious. It was certainly an excellent start to a new series with many laugh-out-loud scenes and dialogue. I really love Tiffany's character as she learns being a witch isn't all about casting spells, but rather it's about being smart or courageous, relying on others for help, helping others who can't help themselves, being a judge, and acting as steward of the land. So I really love the clever and humorous writing in this book. Pratchett manages to present several important and valuable themes and lessons and ideas in a subtle way without ever being preachy or dumbed down. And I can't wait to continue on with her series. And I do believe there's 6 or 7 books in this series, so I'm looking forward to delving into them. So the last book that I read during the month of May was entitled Closer Than You Think by Lee Maguire. This was another advanced reader copy that I received. So this follows Dr. Bryce Davison, a psychologist whose marriage is in shambles. And he's recently separated from his wife, so he's having really a difficult time of it. Then things get even worse when he discovers that he has a stalker. The stalker makes it clear that they know every little private thing about Bryce's life and that they have access to Bryce's home, computer, workplace, wife, and family, and continually reminds Bryce that they are closer than you think. Eventually, the stalker lets on that he or she wants Bryce dead. So I really enjoy stalker books, and this one was extra creepy. I mean, the stalker followed Bryce everywhere, breaking into his house and even dousing his dog with perfume. In this book, I enjoyed the different spin on the stalker genre, as typically I've only read stalker stories where a woman is the victim, so it was refreshing to see a male protagonist written here as the victim. So besides the chilling suspense aspect of this story, I also enjoyed the psychological element to it. Now, given that the author himself is a psychotherapist, I found the author's insight into the human mind compelling and thought that it added an extra depth and layer to the story. I really enjoyed the twists and turns in the story, and though I did predict part of the ending, the whys and the hows of it all, as well as an extra surprise twist at the end, ended up leaving me open-mouthed. There was really a hell of a lot more to the story than I had originally guessed. Now, I did have a few niggles with the book, which kept me from absolutely loving it. For one thing, the abundance of grammar and spelling mistakes kept pulling me out of the story. And there's also way too much description of the narrator's thoughts, page after page after page, which got kind of boring at times, I hate to admit, and really could have been condensed, since a lot of it had little to do with the story and did nothing to propel the plot forward. And what was lacking was emotion behind all of those thoughts. You know, I felt that Bryce didn't display appropriate emotions for someone in his situation. I just didn't feel his fear or his dread, so I really didn't connect with him as much as I should have. But niggles aside, I did enjoy Closer Than You Think. It was a creepy psychological thriller with plenty of tension and surprises, and I'd probably give this a solid 3 stars. So that is it for my super tardy May month end wrap up. And so as you can guess, my June one's going to be a little late. I probably will do the first part right around, maybe toward the last week of the month, and then I'll do part 2 the beginning of July. It's going to be July already. Wow, how did that happen? So anyway, that is it for this time. As always, if you like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd click the like button below, as it always helps my channel out. And that is it for now. I will talk to you all in the next video. Roger and out.